Good afternoon to y'all once again, and this is another edition of The Leap. And today I'm kind of switching things up a little bit. As you may know, I write a blog for ParsonsPersonalTraining.com. It's a little personal training company out here in Tucson, Arizona. And so twice a week I'm always publishing blogs for them, helping them out with their health material. And this week I had a pretty interesting subject that I really wanted to touch on. It was based on some research that was released this week, and it's mostly concerning with the kind of the massive problem here in the United States about childhood obesity. Now it's kind of hard to figure out what are the actual statistics, but it's estimated that about 33% of kids under the age of 18 are clinically overweight, and about a quarter of that, or a quarter of the population under 18 is technically obese. So there's always going to be some disagreement. It used to be 20% of all kids under 18, but for the sake of today's blog we'll go with about 25%, 25 to a third, just to be consistent. And either way, I mean, no matter how you look at the numbers, it's a pretty startling number. Now, if you know anything about psychology, there's always the whole nature versus nurture sort of argument, and a lot of people always believe, which is what I believe personally, the health of your kids, the psyche of your kids, the mental state of your kids are always going to be a result of how they are raised and the kind of home life they have. So if they have a rather chaotic home life, moving a lot, having trouble with their parents, I mean, this sort of thing is going to translate into adulthood. Now, in regards to childhood obesity, this really isn't much of a surprise, because let's face it, kids have no purchasing power. They can't exactly go to the store and get whatever the heck they want, so they basically depend on their parents to feed them. And unfortunately, sometimes poor kids, they're just not going to have the kind of nutrition that middle class and upper class kids have, and then a lot of times they're relying on school lunches, which if you've ever seen some of the links for what the average school lunch is, I'll try to have a couple in the comments section. You'll see that, yeah, there's a reason why a lot of these kids that rely on school lunches from our public school system are still out of shape, still unhealthy. Now, I know it's really kind of silly for me, a guy without a kid, to be railing on parents and whatnot about the health and the eating habits of their kids, but let's face it, I mean, when you sign up for that job, you have to encompass all of its parts, and your child's nutrition should be one of the most important aspects of their lives. I mean, it's only been until recent, in the last couple years, mostly in Britain, where an extremely overweight child can be considered a form of neglect. And right now it hasn't really hit the United States yet, because in the United States the eating culture is much different. We kind of dismiss the whole idea of food addiction. We kind of dismiss the whole idea of having an unhealthy appetite. So until we start looking at some of the central reasons why we have all these eating problems, which we demonize and dismiss, we're still going to keep having these overweight kids. Now, aside from the obvious, I mean, there's been studies that have indicated that if a kid is overweight, eating poorly as a kid, there's a very high likelihood that he is going to eat poorly and be overweight as an adult. And so, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Causation and whatnot equals the result. So it's pretty obvious when a kid growing up heavy is going to stay heavy, because those habits have been imprinted in his mind, and that's sort of what happens. Now, there's some new research which I cited in the blog on ParsonsPersonalTraining.com. I also indicated that it's kind of a preliminary cross-section review, so there's still some research that needs to be done on the subject, but the initial findings indicate that while we have this strange belief that words can never hurt us, sticks and stones may break my bones, words can never hurt me, there's actually some evidence to prove that this is actually kind of contrary when it comes to a child's weight. Now, you can say what you want about this. You can always say that we need to stop coddling kids, but what they're really talking about is just basically telling your kid over time that they'd be much happier if they were skinny. They'd be much prettier if they were skinny. Oh, you need to do this and that to be popular. And while it seems kind of subtle and it seems kind of benign, they actually indicated some evidence that kids are, much more likely to become overweight and have eating problems or food addiction problems, and food eating disorders like bulimia and so whatnot as adults because of this subtle imprinting into their minds. Now, of course, these studies seem to focus mostly on young girls, which, I hate to be that guy, but that seems to be the main focus of most of these eating disorder studies. But in this one particular article, which is why I decided to devote a blog piece about it, was the fact that they actually started talking about young boys, which is kind of the forgotten element in regards to eating addiction and food problems and whatnot. Except the only difference is boys tend to have an issue with their bodies as opposed to girls, where girls wish to be thinner, boys wish to be taller and wish to be stronger looking, more alpha and I can attest to that. I mean, I always kind of had misgivings about the way I looked growing up, even though I was already tall, but I never really hit the weights because, let's face it, I was kind of scared, and I figured being tall and being lean, that was more than enough for me. Anyway, it's this sort of imprinting as a child that really starts either warping their mind or shaping their mind in a positive way. I mean, depending on how the parent kind of approaches the situation, you can certainly say that, maybe commenting on a child's weight or pushing them into certain things, that can certainly lead to some healthier ideas about their body, but it seems to be that there's just more of a negative effect on it, because nowadays, unlike when I was growing up, we barely had an internet. So nowadays we have so many ads, so much bombardment in terms of what people should look like, what we should be striving for, and now so many products that can help us get there, whether they're safe or not, makes it a much more difficult proposition to handle. So essentially what I'm kind of saying right now is that you can't really blame the whole body movement, the proliferation of the negative and positive aspects of body shaming and body acceptance to strictly a media concept. I mean, it's something that has to start at home, which is basically where everything starts, I believe. I mean, the whole nature versus nurture argument, in psychological terms. So I kind of agree with this article, because let me just tell you a little bit about myself when I was growing up. Now I didn't really come from a rich family, so sorry mom, sorry dad, we were kind of lower middle class once we really kind of examine it. I mean, we rarely went on family vacations, and basically family vacation money was to send me and my sisters to Catholic school. So, but growing up and whatnot, my parents, we never really struggled with the idea of body issues, because it always seemed we had just enough food to feed everybody, and so none of us ever really got fat, and it never really became a problem for us. I mean, every now and then my mom and dad would rib each other about their weight, but they never said anything to us about our particular weights, about our particular bodies. And so up until about the time I got to college, I mean, I was still in relatively good shape. I was only about 200 pounds, maybe 215 at the most. I probably gained about 15, 20 pounds in my freshman year. The freshman 15 was more like the freshman 30 for me, probably. So, I mean, just from my personal experience alone, I mean, this whole positive versus negative reinforcement thing kind of fits perfectly with me. I mean, you look at my sisters, they're all in relatively good shape. They're all fairly healthy. So it was since it was never an issue with my parents, we all grew up fairly healthy. Now, the issue for me, of course, there's a variety of problems. When I finally moved out of the house, I think one thing that really hit my head was the fact that I was in control of what I could eat. And, you know, growing up, you know, we didn't really eat much fast food. We didn't eat a whole lot of junk food, so I kind of just went crazy. And plus, I was working at a Jack in the Box at the time, so I just went crazy. And the fact that I had my own disposable income, I was able to order pizza, which is my favorite food still, and what really was my favorite food back then. I mean, I ate like 4 or 5 pizzas a week. And so for me, my problem happened really afterward, when I discovered I had access to my own food choices. So up until I was about 21, 22, my eating problem didn't really surface. And I guess you can really credit the fact that I was healthy for that long from a good upbringing. Now, like I mentioned in last week's blog, there's always going to be a caveat to a medical research paper, and especially in this situation, sometimes you're going to run into those issues about, you know, maybe the parents never really cared whether their kid got fat because the parents themselves were fat. There's also been research to indicate that since so many kids are now overweight these days, that sometimes parents just don't even know that their kid is overweight or becoming obese, because they compare their kid to the kids of their peers. And so if they look like the kids of their peers, then do they really perceive a problem? So I think the gist of this problem is, as a parent, you must always be mindful of your child's health. And sometimes people are going to be way off on the perception, and then sometimes they're going to be spot on. So it's really just important that children have a balanced diet. They have, you know, square meals. Another important aspect was actually eat with your child, especially having a family dinner. And I know it's much more difficult in these times with swing shifts, different hours for parents and whatnot. So, but it just goes to show that it's part of the process of being a parent, that if you want your child to be healthy and you want them to have good habits as an adult, you have to help establish them as a child. Now, this will definitely be a subject I'll touch on more as the life of my blog keeps going along. So this is just kind of a brushing of the surface here. I mean, there's so many different subjects to talk about in terms of childhood obesity. And at least the good news is it kind of stagnated a bit last year, within the last couple of years, primarily due to some programs that were initiated by Michelle Obama, and also a lot of parental organizations that basically took control of the school's menus. But it's still a big problem, because it's just not going to end. So either way, that's all I have to really say about this week. And subscribe to my channel, check out my Twitter feed, check out my Instagram feed, and once again, check out the blog at parsonspersonaltraining.com. And until next time, I'll see you later.